Listen. Imagine a world. Imagine a time. Only in our imagination can this world exist, for nothing that lived then could tell of it. No men walked upon it, no beasts stalked upon it, no birds flew above it. No land was there to walk upon, no hills to stalk upon, and nothing moved across the sky, save cloud and rain, and sun and moon and stars, wheeling by. Imagine then a world of water. See, in your mind's eye, a blue ocean under a blue sky, and sunlight dancing on white crested waves. Look now beneath the surface shine, where shafts of sunlight pry into the realms of strange creatures, microscopically small, ferociously huge, a world of teeming life, all doomed to die. And in the murky depths below, a never-ending shower of mortality drifts like snow from the sunlit levels, building layer upon layer of corpse sediments, which thicker and thicker grow through uncountable millennia, forming a new world's flesh and bones. From its core, the earth spews angry streams of superheated devil's brews, rising through the new rock, penetrating crack and fissure, cooling finally in the seams. And magically, as it cools, precious minerals crystallise all along those hidden courses, veining the world's flesh with a treasure trove of hoarded jewels. So was Mother Peak created beneath strange oceans long ago. Come forward now in time. Imagine a world lifted up above the brine, a world whose broad back is turned to the sun, a world whose pale flesh is covered in green hide, caressed by the whispering wind, with beasts and birds and plants thereon. Behold then, a being ambling across this world on two legs in an easy gait, a rustic being, rudely clad in leather tunic, boots and cap, carrying the tools of his trade. His name is not known, nor that of his clan. So, give him then the name that those who came after made for him. We will call him Toad Man. Toad Man, the ancient miner of the Peak, the spirit of the mine. Toad Man, equally the men who delved to win the lead from the limestone in the far distant past, and also the signs and tokens of his endeavours that he left behind. When latter-day miners broke through into a new vein, only to find that forgotten others had been there before, they would view the pick marks in the walls, the discarded broken tools, the dead stacked carefully in the voids, and nod a respectful acknowledgement to Toad Man. Now even these later miners are gone, and they too have become Toad Man. If you have the eyes to see, you can still find Toad Man swaggering across the hills and dales of the White Peak. A straight line of hollows dimpling the green grass of the dale side, the ruinous crumbling walls of an abandoned engine house, the bright show of lead-tolerant plants, leadwort, mountain pansy, alpine pennycress, speckling a grassed-over spoil heap. mysterious structures and workings disappearing beneath woodland clumps of nettle and bramble. Turbulent water gushing into the river from the arched mouth of an ancient sough, still draining after a century of abandonment the lonely mines on the hill above. This is Toad Man. Long before ever Caesar came, with javelin, mail and sword, I tramped across the Peakland hills and delved beneath its sward. Those paths that never saw no sun, it was my doom to tread, to kneel and crawl and pick and haul in the getting of the lead. When the longships grounded their keels on Anglia's strand, and the Northmen came with fire and war, laying claim to all the land, I went about my business, though lesser men had fled. There were none more bold than we of old, who delved deep for the lead. When Billy Norman raged about and the Northlands were undone, he left us be, 'cause he could see he needed what we won. Each mighty fortress keep he built to fill the folk with dread, for roof and drain and diamond pane required our Peakland lead. When brave Oliver made his war against his anointed lord, and musket shot and cannonball were met with pike and sword, the victory was ours alone, it was upon our head, for ball and shot they all were got from pigs of Peakland lead. The Scots king came to Derby, then turned about again. The wind that wails down Peakland dales blew him back to his mountain glen. We care not for king or conqueror, neither for living nor dead, we who toil beneath the soil in the getting of the lead. My farm of 4 rough acres has pasture for sheep and goats, a garden plot for root, veg and a long field of good oats. But when my husbandry is done, then to the mines I head, to graft and grind where the sun don't shine on we who get the lead. With a tallow light on me beaver's brim and a bag of tools behind, it's down I goes in me raggedy clothes, to the blackness I'm consigned, to stand or kneel at the forefield, with a world above my head, to sweat and curse and earn my purse in the getting of the lead. All our deeds and doings are settled according to law, that was set in stone in the elder days, which no man may ignore. The jury meets at the bar moot, the master sits at its head, and pronounces the law that was given for the governance of the lead. The law. Peak mining law, based on ancient liberties and customs handed down from time beyond memory. Set down in statute by King Edward Longshanks during a break between pacifying the Welsh and hammering the Scots. The law gave every man the right to dig for lead on any land, saving only gardens, churchyards and highways. Such was the demand for lead. The law set out in detail the rights and privileges of every miner and also his duties and responsibilities. It set the taxes and tithes due to landowner and crown. It provided a court and jury, the bar moot, to administer the law and settle disputes. At its head was a crown official, the barmaster. Under the law, lead mining in the Peak prospered. Mining operations grew in scale. The Industrial Revolution brought new advances in drainage technology, enabling shafts to be driven to greater depths. The early dual economy of farming and mining gave way to larger concerns employing many men, and the mineral wealth of the peak began to accumulate in the hands of wealthy investors. But the extraction of this mineral wealth from deep underground was always a risky concern, both for the miners themselves and for the investors. The market price of lead was subject to wild fluctuations, and the output of mines uncertain, costs always rising as the constant battle with the water table demanded more drainage soughs and new pumping engines. Even the larger mines had mixed fortunes, going broke in lean times, reopening a few years later when the prices improved. But while investors came and went, the mines themselves endured, their names becoming part of Peakland tradition. Stand forward, mines of Peakland, your lineage proclaim. From Cryche in the south to Castleton, answer to your name. Magpie, Maypit, Mogshaw, Field Grove, Red Soil, True Blue, Mandale, Mill Close, Mill Dam, Watts Grove and Watergrove too, Odin, Old End, Golconda, Green Linnets, Glory, Snake, Innocent, Good Luck, Greaves Croft, Hill Car, Hillocks, High Rake, Solithole, Stony Lees, Slitherstones, Portway, Pavilion, Royal, Hall-Eye, Brookhead, Lady Wash, Coal Pit Hole, Cumberland, Jug Holes. The names they ring through the ages, and those that the Sheldon men knew were Magpie, Maypit and Mogshaw, Field Grove, Red Soil and True Blue. Sheldon Village, a collection of grey limestone cottages perching high on the edge of the limestone plateau, overlooking the winding valley of the Wye to the north. And to the south, a stone's throw away, the remains of the Magpie mine, abandoned for the best part of a century. The derelict remains of engine house, chimneys and winding gear standing stark against a boundless sky. A rough pasture where humps and hillocks and black bottomless stone-lined shafts mark the sites of the old mines. Magpie, Maypit, Red Soil, True Blue. The sunless depths where the men of Sheldon and surrounding villages laboured for their living. Stand here on a winter's afternoon with the light fading and the west wind blustering among the grass and stones, and grey clouds flying in a darkening sky. Here lies the top of the world. An open field under an endless sky. West wind whistling in the bones of buildings, a lament for the sea and the lowland plain. The top of the world lies not beyond the ocean in some foreign mountain range, but here, beneath this sullen sky, where crumbling stones in monumental melancholy bear silent witness. The past brushes by, bristling the hairs on the neck. A sudden chill, a shadow in the corner of the eye. Wrap your coat close, button it, belt it tight. In this desolate dereliction there is nothing to stop the soul from taking flight, wailing away on the wind's wings. And yet, when the green hillocks are dappled by spring's sunlight and first flowers, when grey stone glowers like pale moonlight, and skylark in singing flight mounts into blue sky, the soul feels secure in the certain knowledge that the top of the world is the closest place to heaven. Dispute, disorder, violence. As if the daily travail of working in ill-lit passages deep below ground were not peril enough. The dispute began when Magpie miners broke through into a vein already being worked by the neighbouring Maypit mine. Both sides claimed to have freed the vein first, and indeed the Maypit miners had been working the vein for many years. The Barmoot court upheld their claim. But the wealthy Magpie shareholders were not prepared to give in easily. Further actions in the Barmoot overturned the decision and awarded the vein to Magpie. The written evidence of Maypit's freeing of the vein had strangely disappeared from the Barmoot's records. Ill feeling and resentment soured relationships between the rival miners. The situation worsened a few years later when Magpie miners broke through into another Maypit-owned mine, the Red Soil. Again, both sides disputed the ownership, and again the Barmoot jury was unable to decide on which side the right lay. The miners began to take the law into their own hands. Fights, both above and below ground, erupted. Sentries were set, and fires lit below ground, burning sulphur and coal oil, in an attempt to drive the rival miners out. Both sides were guilty of these hostilities. So neither side were blameless when, in September 1833, tragedy struck. On the last day of August, a Saturday morning, the Red Soil miners were driven from their work by copious amounts of smoke blowing through the shaft linking their workings to those of the Magpie mine. Hostile words were exchanged, but no work was possible that day. Henry Knowles, the Red Soil overseer, ordered the Red Soil shaft to be sealed to contain the smoke in the levels where it would escape, so he thought, back into the Magpie workings. Knowles was later to deny this in court. On the Monday morning, 2nd of September 1833, the Red Soil men again gathered at the top of their shaft, and Knowles sent a man below ground to investigate the state of the mine. After descending some distance, the man returned to report that the smoke had abated and that the mine could be entered. Several of the men objected, but Knowles, fearful of losing possession of the mine, threatened them with loss of employment and drove them to work. The events which followed are perhaps best described in a booklet published soon after the subsequent trial.
The way down into the mine is down a perpendicular shaft, similar to a dry well, down which the miners clamber by the help of cogs driven into the sides. At the depth of about 40 yards there is a drift gate or level, which proceeds for some distance, and then the miners go down other shafts and along the drift gates until they arrive at the wagon way, where the point of communication between the two mines is situated. 4 of the men had got into the waggonway when they experienced a dreadful feeling of suffocation from the fumes arising from some substances which had been ignited. 2 of the men retreated up a shaft about 14 yards into the drift gates and gave the alarm to those who were descending. The other 2 were so overpowered by the poisonous vapour as to be unable to get up the shaft. They lay down on their faces, and by inhaling the moisture from the earth saved their lives. They were the last who were extricated. One of the men was with great difficulty enabled to get so near the surface as to give the alarm to the persons on the mine hillock, and after great exertions, and at the utmost personal risk, 8 of the men were rescued alive, but the other 3 were not got out until life was quite extinct. The names of the unfortunate sufferers were Thomas Wager of Longstone, aged 41, who had a wife and 8 children; Isaac Bagshaw of Sheldon, aged 40, who had a wife and 3 children; and Francis Taylor of Bakewell, aged 22, who had a wife and 1 child. The bodies of Bagshaw and Taylor were found jammed together in one of the shafts, their heads hanging down and blood running from their mouths. There is every reason to believe that Wager lost his life in attempting to save 2 of the men who, in retreating, he found lying insensible in one of the levels. Some of the men passed him at the spot, where he exclaimed, "For God's sake, come back and assist me to get up these 2 poor fellows." He was found lying in the shaft a short distance from them, and about 3 yards below the 2 dead bodies, which he had found impossible to pass.
They're playing silly buggers, and we've been playing too. They're after our lead, they're stealing our bread. They'll get more than they can chew. If they fancies a nice smoke as they work, we'll mix them a cordial brew. They're playing silly buggers, we've admonished them before. We broke some heads to save our lead, we've given them what for. The Barmoot court is on our side, the Barmoot is the law. They're playing silly buggers, so we must do the same. We freed the rake, she's ours to take. It was freed in the red soil's name. But Brittlebank, the lawyer knave, denies our legal claim. They're playing silly buggers, lighting oil fires in the gate. We're breathing smoke, it ain't no joke, we're in a sorry state. We'll mine no red soil ore today, till this lot do abate. They're playing silly buggers, but so were we, I fear. We set fires too, and oily brews, to smoke the scoundrels clear. We did so on the orders of Knowles, the overseer. They're playing silly buggers, the red soil's full of fume. Knowles, the clown, has drove us down into this choking gloom. I fear this stinking smoke-filled pit may yet become our tomb. We played at silly buggers, now 3 of us lie cold. 3 widows made by the games we played, it makes the blood run cold. 12 children to see their fathers laid underneath the mould. We played at silly buggers, and now our luck's gone lame. The inquest sits tomorrow morn to portion out the blame, but all the men of Sheldon should hang their heads in shame. On the day after the tragedy, a post-mortem and inquest was held at the Devonshire Arms, Ashford, with a jury drawn from respected men from neighbouring townships before the coroner, Mr. Mander. After 2 days of inquiry, examination and deliberation, the inquest returned a verdict of wilful murder against 20 Magpie miners, and charged 2 more with being accessories before the fact. 18 of the accused were arrested and committed to the county jail at Derby to face trial for their lives at the Derby Assizes in March. They would not be allowed to speak in their own defence. If found guilty, they would hang, their bodies given over for anatomical dissection. The cramped and diseased cells of Derby Jail, must have seemed a long way from the top of the world, even to men accustomed to a life below ground. Word has sped around the peak. Murder at the mine. The coroner passed judgment. The blame must be assigned. And 18 men are in the clink, in Derby jail confined. 18 Peakland miners must answer for their lives. At Derby Assizes, Judge Littledale presides, facing the threat of the hangman's noose and the anatomist's knife. March the 22nd, 1834. 18 men brought in chains through Derby courthouse door, accused of the wilful murder of Wager, Taylor and Bagshaw. Blinking in the sunlight, their faces stretched and pale, barred from speech in their own defence, nor allowed to tell their tale. 18 Peakland miners stand silent at the rail. And 18 Peakland miners stand upon that slender line, between innocent and guilty, between shades of truth and lie. The finger points at 18 men for murder in the mine. As soon as the trial began, the weakness of the case for the prosecution became evident, and after a short deliberation, the Crown lawyers announced that no evidence would be brought against 8 of the accused. The judge then directed the jury to return a verdict of not guilty against these men, and they were immediately freed. The prosecution then proceeded to call witnesses to give evidence against the remaining 10. A sorry tale began to emerge of bickering, threats and ill feelings between the neighbouring mines, but solid evidence was thin on the ground. Hearsay evidence there was in plenty of threatening words and gestures, reports of bales of hay and bottles of oil seen taken down the mine, vague and sometimes conflicting stories of who did and who said what on the days leading up to the tragedy. How were the jury to apportion blame fairly, especially as they were not miners themselves and must have found it impossible to picture the events being described? At the start of the second day, the case against another 5 men was thrown out. Only 5 of the original 22 named at the Ashford inquest were now left to answer the charges. The evidence continued in the same vein of the previous day. To gain a conviction, the prosecution had to show knowledge and intent. Who had lit the fatal fires? What had been burned? Was it deadly sulphur, as some claimed, or merely straw and coal oil, unpleasant but less hazardous? And even the cause of death of at least one of the victims was disputed. One doctor, called by the defence, being of the opinion that Isaac Bagshaw and possibly Francis Taylor had been killed by falling rather than suffocation. And so the case ground on to its conclusion. The case against the 18 men was quickly underway, and 8 men of the 18 were freed on that first day. They had no case to answer, Justice Littledale did say. So, now 10 Magpie miners stood accused before the court. The jurymen were duly sworn, and witnesses were brought to tell the tale of violence that in the mine was wrought. And some said this, and some said that. The case at first seemed strong. Then other men stood up on oath and sang a different song, and neither judge nor juror could sort out right from wrong. And when the trial ran over into its second day, 5 more men were acquitted and duly sent away. So 5 were left to face the charge of murder and affray. The evidence being brought at last, the witnesses all heard. The judge began his summing up, the jury then conferred. A short deliberation, not guilty came the word. So, 18 men who might have swung walked free from Derby jail. 18 men who faced the drop and lived to tell the tale. But still 3 men lay in the grave, forever beyond the pale. And 3 poor Peakland widows laid a curse upon the mine. Bad fortune to the Magpie, dereliction and decline. Bad luck to they who set the fires until the end of time. So, the Magpie miners walked free from court, their ordeal over. Conflicting evidence and the difficulty of proving knowledge or intent had sunk the case for the prosecution. So who was to blame? The Magpie men had undoubtedly set fires below ground to interfere with the Red Soil's operation. But then the Red Soil men themselves were hardly innocent of such skullduggery, and it had been impossible to prove just who had lit the fatal fire. And what of Knowles, the Red Soil overseer? Had he, in spite of his denial in court, ordered the sealing of the mine, instead of allowing proper ventilation to dissipate the noxious fumes? Certainly, in his anxiety to reopen the mine, he had pressurised his men into going down into those perilous levels, despite their misgivings. The Magpie shareholders should shoulder some of the blame. Their legal chicanery and attempts to manipulate the Barmoot had made the dispute difficult to resolve, and Magpie managers had certainly interfered with the Barmoot jurors' proper inspections of the contested vein. Recklessness, belligerence and bravado had been the order of the day. Perhaps the repercussions could have been foreseen. 3 men dead, others injured, the mines ruined. Only the lawyers profited, a common enough story. And what happened after? The Magpie mine closed, broken by legal costs, but reopened 5 years later under new ownership and with the Red Soil and Maypit mines now taken into its title. Cornish men were brought to Sheldon, their expertise in large-scale deep mining driving the shafts and levels to greater depths. But it was always a problematical enterprise, short periods of prosperity ending in ultimate failure, as the costs of drainage bled the investors dry. Closure, reopening under new owners, and so the cycle went on down the years. Perhaps the red soil widow's curse was at work after all. By the beginning of the 20th century, the heyday of the Peakland lead mine was past and gone. The constant battle against the water table was lost in the face of cheap, high-quality lead ore imported from the other side of the world. Mining operations continue here and there in the Peak, but other minerals, such as fluorspar, once discarded by the old miners as worthless, are now the prize, lead being a mere byproduct. And at the end, when all is said and done, all that is left is towed man. See, our day is over. Our industry is done. No more shall we go to the gates below, far from the gaze of the sun. Cheap imports from beyond the sea have robbed our craft of worth. We were unmade by foreign trade and the water beneath the earth. Green grass and flowers bedeck the mounds where we laboured far from sight, and ghosts now walk the levels where we toiled in tallow light. Now only the wind remembers us, and whispers to those who would hear tales of Toad Man and all his clan, and the wonders we accomplished here.